Hey there, my fellow lunatics, and welcome to Dakon's Madhouse. Today, we're going to give a rundown of the ranged weapons in Corekeeper at their starting level. But before we get started, let's talk real quick about the grading rules. Number 1, all of the items are at their starting level. There are no item level upgrades. None of the items are reinforced. I have noticed that at lower levels, a lot of people tend not to reinforce their items, so I'm going to assume that you don't have the resources, or you just keep forgetting to reinforce. Number 3, I take into account at what point in the game the item is normally going to be found. So for example, the copper sword is more useful in the early game than in the late game, so I'm rating things with this kind of consideration in mind. Number 4, different playstyles can alter the ranking of various weapons for different people. Now, I'm going to try to stay neutral and take all these different playstyles into account, but I must admit I have a bit of a bias toward fast attack speed weapons that hit more often than single shot attacks that do more damage in a single blow. I'm going to do my best not to let that get the better of me though. With that out of the way, let's take a quick look at the rating system in general and what each tier means. Starting with the S tier. This is the top tier. These are going to be our super versatile items, the best of the best, things that are used in multiple builds. A tier, those are going to be excellent items. Top tier for at least one build, and often versatile, but not necessarily the best of the best. B tier are strong items that you really aren't going to complain about, but they have limited use or are eventually outclassed by other items. C tier, these items are fine. You can't go wrong with them, but you will eventually replace them, or you are going to replace them pretty quickly. D tier, maybe these items have a little bit of a niche use, but otherwise they're really not that useful or worthwhile. And F tier, the item is trash, it's not any good, don't bother using it. Alright, with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started with ranking all of the weapons. Alright, so first we have got the Blowpipe. And this one, I'm going to go ahead and put this one right into A tier. We're going to start off strong. The Blowpipe is a fast and powerful weapon, and one that you can get pretty early on once you have dropped the Great Wall. I think it's a great weapon, and it is definitely worth getting your hands on. We're going to follow up the Blowpipe with the Bomb Mortar Scarab. And while the Blowpipe was great, this item, not so great. I mean, if you decide to go for an explosive build, then this is probably one of the better weapons for the explosive build, but explosive builds aren't all that great in general, especially at the level that you're going to get your hands on this thing. It's really just not worth it. The Bubble Gun, going from bad to worse. The Bubble Gun is going into F tier. Frankly, I have yet to find a good value for this thing. I've been told by some people that it's a good gun. I challenge you to prove that to me, because I have not found this to be a worthwhile weapon, and I think if it was removed from the game, no one would miss it. Next, we have got the Grubzuka, and this one is also going into D tier. If you like damaging walls with these explosive weapons, then the Grubzuka is great. And there is a mining build that you can put together that is specifically designed for breaking walls using these type of tools. But that's using these things as tools, not weapons. And right now we're ranking them as weapons. And as far as weapons go, the Grubzuka is not that good. The Cupid Bow, I'm also going to put this one into D tier. Not because it's complete crap, because it's just gimmicky. You know, it's fun to be able to shoot your enemies, to turn them into allies, and have them turn against each other, but doing this doesn't work on boss fights. So it kind of defeats kind of half the purpose that I would think of this weapon, as it's just only useful for fighting other mobs. You can't really use it on a boss. So to me, it's just a fun gimmick, but otherwise not really anything that anyone serious would actually pay attention to. But now that we've dealt with some of the worst ones, let's jump into some of the better items. We have got the Fireball Staff, which is going to be our first S tier item. As far as ranged weapons go, this is one of the best pre-wall ranged weapons. The burn damage, I think, makes up for its slower attack speed, and it has got a strong hit. It kills a lot of those pre-wall enemies and is just a really, really good weapon. If you're not using the Iron Bow, you're probably using the Fireball Staff. The Flintlock Musket, this one I am going to put into C tier. Now, it is a good weapon, especially when you get your hands on it. It is often one of the first decent weapons that you get your hands on, but there are some craftable bows now that can rival it. Because of its slow attack speed, it does struggle, especially when you're dealing with large groups of enemies. And until you gain the ability to level it up, it really doesn't come into its own. So as it is at starting level, it's a fine weapon, but there's better. If you don't have better yet, use this, but you are going to replace it. Next, we have got the Galaxite Chakram, and this one I am putting into S tier. It is a strong weapon. It is a fast weapon. Its bonus is crit based, which makes it versatile. And to top it all off, this thing is craftable. So as soon as you can get your hands on Galaxite, you can get one of the top ranged weapons in the game and just hold on to it for the rest of the game. Moving on, we are now looking at the Grubzuka. And this one I am putting into C tier. It is more useful as a mining tool than it is as a weapon. But at the time that you get it, it doesn't entirely suck as a ranged weapon. If you haven't gotten your hands on the Flintlock yet, or you haven't decided to get enough iron to make an iron bow yet, then yeah, you can use this one a little bit, but you're gonna replace it pretty fast. The Hand Mortar is next, and this one I am putting into F tier. It's slow, the damage really isn't all that great, and frankly, there's always something better that you're going to have the ability to use at that stage in the game. So just skip over the Hand Mortar completely and go with something else. Anything else. The Iron Bow, this one is S tier. In my opinion, it is the best pre-wall weapon that you can get your hands on for ranged. It is reliable, it's craftable, and it is just a good weapon to use because its damage gets off a lot quicker. And especially in the early game, it's good to have a fast weapon so that you don't get overwhelmed. The Octarine Bow is next, and this one I'm putting it into C tier, as there's really nothing wrong with it. But personally, I prefer the Blowpipe. And if you haven't gotten the Blowpipe yet, then yeah, the Octarine Bow is a good weapon. It's craftable. Use it until you find something better. The Phantom Spark. This is the legendary bow, and fortunately, it is a lot better than its melee counterpart. This one I'm going to put into A tier. It is indestructible, which is its biggest allure. It also has the adds that can spawn the little ghost guys, and those are really useful. The only reason I'm not putting it into S tier is because it is so challenging to get that it may not necessarily be worthwhile, especially when you can craft weapons that are just as good in the Galaxite Chakram, or have an easier chance of finding just as good items in the Ricochet Shuriken or the throwing daggers. So the difficulty to get it is the only thing limiting this thing for me as far as S tier. Speaking of S tier items, we have got the Ricochet Shuriken, which is going right into S tier. This is an item that I didn't know a lot about at first, but I have since come to fall in love with it. It's a little... If you are into one-hit attacks, this is not the weapon for you, because you really need to shoot off a whole bunch of shurikens and get them going to create this kind of web of shurikens firing off everywhere that just hit the enemy over and over again. But these guys are really great. If aimed right, you can even use the Ricochet Shuriken to shoot and destroy those Shimmering Frontier alien robots when they have their shields up, because it will shoot past them, ricochet back, and hit them in the back where they're not shielded. Really cool weapon. And going from cool to mediocre, the Scarlet Crossbow is going into D tier. Look, it's okay, and if you really just want to use a crossbow, go ahead and use it. but it's slow. Its damage really isn't all that great, and it's just not that effective. You'd be better off just going into the ocean biome, getting your hands on some Octarine and crafting an Octarine Bow instead of crafting the Scarlet Crossbow. The Scholar Staff is our next item, and I'm putting this one into B tier. Now, a lot of people wonder why this is B tier when the Fireball Staff is S tier, and this thing is a clear upgrade from the Fireball Staff. Well, the main reason for that is because this is, yes, a good ranged weapon. And yes, if you aren't upgrading your gear levels, then this weapon is better than the Fireball Staff. If you've gotten to a point where you're actually starting to upgrade your items, then upgrading the Fireball Staff is a better choice than using the Scholar Staff, because the Fireball Staff is just a stronger weapon overall. Now, that's not to say that this isn't a good weapon. That's why I'm putting it in B tier. You're going to use it if you haven't started doing upgrades, or if you haven't gotten around to getting your hands on one of the better ranged weapons. It's better than the Octarine Bow, but it's not as good as like the Galaxite Chakram, and the Galaxite Chakram I think is easier to get than this. So if you've got it, great, use it until you find something better, but you will replace it. The Slingshot. This one is going into C tier. Again, I'm sure people are wondering why. Why would you put this into C tier? This should be an F tier item. And you'd think that this would be. Its damage is terrible. It's not really effective. You're going to have a better item just in the wood bow alone, which you can get for free or craft real easily. Why is the Slingshot so high rated? Because its damage is so low, it is an excellent training weapon. You can use this to work your range skill up because it's easy to craft, it's easy to get a whole bunch of them, and its damage is just terrible. So you can use it on bosses or other creatures to just train up your range skill without actually killing the enemy. The Solarite Crossbow is also going into C tier. It is just as slow as its other crossbow companions. However, unlike them, it actually has some pretty good bonuses, and its damage is high enough to make it viable to actually make up for the fact that it is a slower weapon. So if you don't have anything better, go ahead and craft that Solarite Crossbow, because it will work well for you until you find one of the faster or just overall better items in the game. The Sticky Stick. This one is also going into C tier, mostly because while it is very gimmicky, this gimmick works well at low levels. So it is a good defensive item for the point of the game in which you get it. Slowing enemies becomes less useful as the game progresses, but early on it can be a useful tool, and especially useful in a ranged weapon, because it just keeps those enemies away from you when you don't have the hit points to take the hits. All right, next we have got the Throwing Daggers, our final S tier item. And these are, in my opinion, the best ranged weapon in the game. They're my preferred ranged weapon next to the Ricochet Shuriken. I have been using these for a long time. The crit boost is amazing. The damage is excellent. The weapon speed is wonderful. The only thing that kind of sucks is that their durability is low and you got to repair them often. Other than that, these things just tear up bosses. They tear up enemy mobs in general. Great weapon. Okay, and our last good item here is the wooden bow, and I'm putting this into B tier. And the main reason for it is because for a starter weapon, this thing is really strong. I've actually taken this and right off the bat gone and found Glurch and killed him with nothing else prepped. So for a weapon that you can make with just a couple of pieces of wood and that you can get for free by making the right character class, this is a really strong weapon that you'll actually hold on to for a decent amount of time in that early game. Yeah, you're going to replace it, but it's still pretty good. Finally, we're going to go out on a low note, as we usually do with wooden items, and the wooden crossbow is going into D tier. For all the same reasons as the Scarlet Crossbow, it's just too slow, it's just not effective, especially when you've got the wooden bow right there already. It's just a no-brainer. Use the wooden bow, not the wooden crossbow. And that wraps everything up for today's episode. If you enjoyed yourself, please be sure to hit that like button, subscribe if you're interested in watching my videos regularly, and if you feel like adding some extra support to the channel, you can always join our Patreon or become a YouTube member. There are links in the description. Thanks again for watching. You're all wonderful, and until next time, stay crazy.